Okay, and we're live. We have some
Hi
people
guys.
joined. Nice. If you guys want to let us know where you're coming in from, I'm in Canada. I'm in Halifax. Lisa is in the States.
I am. Kansas.
Kansas. All right. Good evening, everyone. Happy to be here too, Angela. Okay, I'm gonna get us started off with a little poll here. Let's see. Publish this. Have you already created a wedding day timeline? Obviously, today we're going to be going over the wedding day timeline. It'd be cool to see where you guys are at. Sudbury, Ontario, nice. Williamsburg, Vancouver Island. Oh, nice. My grandma lives there. Pennsylvania, Virginia Beach. Awesome.
More states. I like the states too.
From Sydney, Australia, Katie. That's awesome.
That's great.
Yeah. It's late or early there. I don't know. Jersey, Brooklyn.
Love it. But on vacation in Florida, I want to be on vacation in Florida. That sounds nice.
Okay, so we have a lot of people who've already done one and a lot who haven't. So I think it's perfect. We're going to be going over the basics and going over an existing timeline. We had a student volunteer their work, so we'll be reviewing theirs, going over Lisa's own timeline, and obviously comparing it to our template that we give students. So I think this is an exciting webinar. Lisa and I, we've been prepping for this one for a few months. We think it's important to go over and just kind of see, we're giving you guys a foundation, but after years of, being in the industry, how do you personalize it, customize it to your own needs? So obviously Lisa's been doing this for so many years, and we're going to get to hear from an expert in this field. So prep all your questions. We're going to be going through a Q&A later after our quick presentation. So if you guys have thoughtful questions, if you've already done a timeline and you have some weird, things that happen that you didn't know how to deal with, put them in the Q&A and we'll hopefully go through all those questions. So you guys already know from me, I'm in the virtual community. If you haven't joined yet, I highly recommend that you join. I'll be sharing the link with you guys. And Lisa, if you want to introduce yourself to those who don't already know you.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I'm Lisa. I am an event expert with QC, but I am also a wedding planner in the Midwest. I have been in the event industry for 17 years and been specifically a wedding planner for most of those years. So definitely weddings are my specialty, but I have had a hand in all different kinds of events as well.
Nice. So you guys stay tuned. We're going to be sharing some resources. We're going to be going over timelines, and we have a student who volunteered their work, like I mentioned. So stick around. There's some awesome stuff that we're going to cover. And I think we could just get right into it. Hoping to not have any tech difficulties. We're going to be sharing screens and stuff. So I think we could just get started.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically what I want to kind of do with you guys tonight is to kind of really just walk through kind of the stages of building a wedding day timeline. And we're going to start with the materials that you guys all get when you do timelines in QC. And then we're going to take it from their template into my template. And then I'm going to show you how I actually build almost 3 different wedding day itineraries for each event. And you'll see that they just all build one on top of each other. So that's kind of how I want to do that. So we're going to start by taking a look at the information that you get from QC. So let me start with that here. And I'm going to share that. Okay. Can everyone see the wedding day itinerary?
Yeah, I can see it on my end. Let us know in the chat if there's any issues.
Perfect. Yeah. So I can't see you guys right now. So that's why just make sure that you let Malcolm know. Malcolm, you let me know if you can't hear or see or anything like that. But obviously this is the wedding day itinerary that you guys have in your QC materials. And I love that it's very simple and very structured in terms of really breaking down those bullet points of the things that you might or might not need for a wedding day. This really kind of makes you put a time to each one of these different events that you have going on here. Now, some things like right up here at the top, where we talk about hair appointments, makeup appointments. A lot of times I lump those two things together. So generally speaking, I'll have a hair and makeup team. They come on site to location. And so I lump that into one category. You obviously are going to figure out what works best for you and your unique situations and whatever, locations you're at. But that's just something that I typically do. I do really like, though, that this one is not only talking about the things that the bride and groom might be doing, but it also talks about what the vendors are doing. And we're going to get into that a lot more. I like to really color code things, and you'll see that as we kind of go through some of these things. Now, when I decide to do an itinerary, when I start working on an itinerary for a client, the very first thing that I do is I go to the ceremony start time. So, the reason that I do that is because that is like the one time during the event that really can't be moved one way or the other. So if the wedding ceremony is starting at 4:00, then I start with the ceremony. I go all the way through the end of the night, and then I go backwards and I do the pre-ceremony events that are happening, like breakfast, lunch, hair and makeup, transportation moves, getting people to the locations, like the ceremony location and things like that. So I do things a little bit backwards, but I always start with that ceremony time because that's kind of that fixed time that doesn't move. And so that's something that I would suggest starting with. In most cases, ceremonies are usually about 30 minutes if it's a secular or a Protestant type ceremony. There are obviously longer ceremonies if it's a Catholic ceremony, if it's a ceremony that has dual languages. Things like that can make a ceremony last longer, but general rule of thumb is that a ceremony is about 30 minutes. I've also had ceremonies last 5 minutes. So definitely talk to the couple about what they're envisioning, but most of the time about 30 minutes is usually pretty good.
Real quick, two things, Lisa.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you able to zoom in a bit? I noticed some people in the chat mentioned it's not really legible. If you could bring it up just yeah.
Yep. Is that better?
Yep.
Yes.
Let's go one more bigger. Can we do that?
Yep.
150, 140. Yeah, that's probably good. Let us
know
work? Okay. If that's better. My second thing was, so for the ceremony planning around that, it's kind of like that's your anchor point. That's how you
exactly.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I love that term too, because that really is the anchor. That is like I said, it's the one thing that really doesn't change once you kind of settle on that ceremony time. Now, there's going to be some locations that are going to give you that ceremony time. Like if you're at a Catholic church, they're going to actually tell you what time that ceremony has to be. Maybe they'll give you a window, like it has to be from like 1:00 to 3:00 or something like that. But for the most part, that time, once you decide that's what's going on the invitation, that's the one thing that really generally doesn't move one way or the other once you finalize the ceremony start time. So that's where I kind of like to start. And then in going to, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one. So let me stop sharing here.
Yeah, I think students still find it a bit blurry. I think it's better now, but if we could zoom it, maybe 175.
I'll try that on the, now I don't know if I can make this bigger. This is on the web page.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that might be better actually.
Okay, this one is better.
I think, are you sharing it right now?
I am.
I don't see it on my end.
Nope. Let me try again. Sorry, guys. I'm new at this screen sharing thing. Share.
There we go. Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Is it legible?
To me, it's legible. Let us know in the chat. If you're on your phone, it might be a little more difficult to see.
Okay. Yeah. And I apologize about that. So this is the template, the actual template itinerary that is in the QC materials as well. So again, this is a sample of what a wedding timeline can look like. And again, I love that it's very bullet pointed. It's got the times off to the left. I even love where you have like 10:30 to 1:00 because it's giving you that window of time. Everything's in a nice chronological order, which is really great. This part on the right where it says responsibility, that's not always necessarily something that I would need to have in my timelines, mostly because I know who the people are that are involved. But if that's something that's helpful to you, please definitely have that. Again, when we look at the next timeline, you're going to see where I start to like do some color coding and things like that. And that's how I differentiate between who is responsible for which of these items in the overall timeline, still making sure that it's chronological. So again, this one is really going to have, I'm going to go down to the ceremony start time again. So this one has ceremony start time at 4:00. Can everyone see this okay?
Yeah, we're still seeing some blurry things. I think like generally we're going to be sharing these documents as well. So you guys will get a copy of these, but maybe just keep track of like the ideas that are being, so like chronological order. Just like there's key points that I think we're pointing out. And then if you guys want, I'll be posting these in the VC as well. So
yeah, and I think the next ones I should be able to blow up, so hopefully that will help as well. But again, starting here with the ceremony at 4:15, 4:45, again, that's that right time frame, right at 30 minutes. And then after that, you're going right into recessional, and then we're going into photos, going over to a different venue. That definitely happens sometimes. Sometimes the ceremony location is not the same as the reception location. Although at least in the States, I would say that we're seeing a bigger trend of not doing as many church ceremonies as we once did. Not necessarily like with the Catholic wedding, but with Protestant, we see a lot more just people are doing it on site at the reception location rather than just having two different locations. So sometimes that can be affecting your timeline if there's movement that has to happen from venue to venue, or they can just literally turn around and they go straight into social hour or cocktail reception, immediately following the ceremony. So just make sure you're asking those questions that you understand if there's movement or if there's not movement, because you'll need to factor that into your timeline. You've got more photos happening, lots of photos happening in this case after the ceremony, which is great. That's all going to be dependent on whether or not a first look happens. First looks are going to happen prior to the ceremony. If a first look is not happening, I always want to put that information into the timeline so that it's very clear that the bride and groom don't want to see each other. That way, everyone that sees the timeline knows that we're keeping the two of them apart from each other. Generally after cocktails end, then you go into the reception and you kind of see this laid out here. In this case, you have the 3-course meal, you have the dinner, you have toast, dancing, cake cutting, things like that. And you'll learn what order to do those in as you kind of work with your clients. There's lots of different orders in terms of when they do first dance, when they do cake cutting, when they do toast. I'll show you some examples of what I typically do, but that can always be in flux. It does not have to be the same order for every single reception. So just talk to your clients and get a feel for what they like, what they've seen, what you've done, and then just factor in enough time for each one of those components. And then you go, again, as you're building, you go prior to the ceremony. And that's when you build out the time before. How long does it take for the processional? Do we have to get people from a getting ready location to the ceremony location? Is everything in one location? Do we have transportation that's moving the wedding party from location to location? Are they doing a first look? Are they not? Are they doing a bridesmaid reveal? Are they not? Are they doing a first look with dad? Are they not? So these are all questions that are kind of standard questions that I ask my clients as we begin building the overall timeline. And usually the day starts with hair and makeup for most weddings. And that goes kind of right back to the beginning here.
So how soon are you starting this timeline? Like, how long does it take you usually to build out into like the final look of it? And
yeah.
how soon should you be starting?
Yeah, so I actually like to start my timelines right away.
Okay.
And I say right away, like I want to get my vendor team built. So if I'm working for a client full service, I want to go ahead and get the vendor team built, and then I want to start working on the timeline.
Okay.
But a lot of the things that we talk about with our vendors is, well, are you looking for, like what time of day, and, when are we doing sunset photos, and like all those different kind of things. A lot of those can be put on hold until you have the vendor team booked, and then you create your timeline.
Right. So you build around like more rigid things in the day, and yeah, so you get the more rigid things organized first and then build around that.
Exactly. Yeah, vendor team booked, and then itinerary. And one of the reasons that I also do that too is because one of the first vendors that most people are likely to book is their photographer. So one of the first things I do once I build the timeline, and sometimes this is even before I share the timeline with the clients, I'll actually share it with the photographer, especially if it's a photographer I haven't worked with very often, or it's a new photographer to me. I'm always going to be like team player. I always want all of us vendors to be working towards the same goal. I don't want to just assume that like, hey, I built this timeline and this is going to be perfect for the photographer. I want to get feedback from the photographer that is telling me that I'm on the right track with what I've built. Again, I've done this for a long time. So most of the time, my photographers don't come back to me and say they need more time. However, I have a new photographer I'm working with in October, and she is not just a photographer, but she's a content creator. So the amount of time that she wants for bridal portraits and wedding party portraits and things like that is a lot longer than what I would typically do for a wedding day. And so
is there a reason you're working with like a new photographer, or is it like a recommended from
the client? The client actually brought this photographer on before they hired the wedding planner.
Okay, got it.
So that's why. Yeah. So not that I wouldn't ever recommend her. She just has a different style of photography because she does content creation. There's a lot of planners that would, I've seen this happen many times before, where the planner will then kind of butt heads with the photographer because they feel like the photographer is trying to like run the show. What I try to do is look at it from the photographer's perspective. If this client just paid $12,000 to have a content creator and a photographer on board, then I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that photographer is happy, just like I would want that photographer to make sure that, that my time is respected as well. Ultimately, we're building a day for our clients, and that's why we want to work together on this situation.
So
there's a lot of people that would be like,
yeah. Are you having, is it common to have meetings, like multiple meetings with a photographer before the event?
So it's not even necessarily just a meeting. Like I said, a lot of times will build the timeline, and then I'll email that to the photographer and say, hey, let me know what your thoughts are on this. If you need more time for certain things, I'd be happy to meet with you or talk with you. Most of the time, the photographer writes back and says, everything looks good. And occasionally they might say like, hey, there's this like custom first look they want to do. So can we get like 20 extra minutes there? And I'll retweak the timeline and then send it back to the photographer for approval. And then I'll send it on to the client. And then we'll start going through and tweaking little things like that. So, but yes, I don't necessarily think you have to have a ton of extra meetings unless it gets to that point where you're just way far off from where the photographer is. And then you might want to sit down and actually have a meeting about it.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so you kind of saw, hopefully a little bit, the two examples that were from QC. And so now I'm going to go into what I actually use, just my template that I start with. And I'm going to share that. And that is this one.
Yeah, like I mentioned, guys, for the blurry stuff, we'll be sharing it in the virtual community, and you should get the resource as well at the end of the webinar. I'll be sharing that, so you can download it. And look.
Okay, I'm going to make this 150. Is that better?
Yeah, to me, this is super clear, but let us know in the chat. We can make it larger.
Yep, I can go up to 200 if I need to.
Yeah. We'll keep it at this for now.
Okay, so this is a version of my template. Obviously, I have my logo at the top, but I, in my opinion, you can never have too much detail on your wedding day timeline. And so it's always great to have as much information as you possibly can. And this template is going to start off being really just for the client so that they have an understanding of what the day looks like. We're going to talk about vendors in a minute. We're going to talk about my staff in a minute. But for right now, we're really just looking at it from the client's perspective. Okay. So again, I like to put important information at the top, the couple's names, their date. I like to put my information on there, my phone number. I like to know what the estimated guest count is. Later, I'll switch that over to the actual guest count. I like to know who the parents are. A lot of times parents are helping to pay for things. They're hosting things. I like to be very respectful and know who they are before I walk into the situation on rehearsal day, if I don't have the opportunity to meet with them during the actual planning process. So I put all that information in there. I start usually with rehearsal day. So if that's a separate day, I make sure I put that on there. And then I put the actual addresses on there. So again, I want to be very detailed about the information that I'm putting into the timeline. Okay. Then I go down to the actual wedding day. In this case, I have a template that's the ceremony and reception is in the same location. You'll notice that I have some things in red over here. Usually that's like that because it's a reminder to me that I need to go back and update that time once I have the actual time. Hair and makeup start times is one of the things that I get later in the schedule. And so that's something that I know has to be updated. Also what time the groomsmen and the groom are going to get together. Are they having lunch somewhere? Are they meeting at the hotel? Are they meeting at the venue? That's usually information I don't get until a little bit closer to the wedding date as well. I go into hair and makeup. I talk about when people should be getting dressed, if there's a bridesmaid reveal, if there's a first look with dad, first look for the couple. And then if they are doing a first look, then I like to go right into photos immediately after that. So that's really helpful.
And just to be clear, first look means the partners do not see each other. That it's the first look of the day that they see each other.
That's right. In other words, they're not waiting until the ceremony to see each other.
Okay.
So that's the first time that they see each other dressed up in their wedding attire.
Okay. Yeah.
So first look for like bride and father, it's the first time that dad is seeing her in her wedding dress. And then the first look for bride and groom is the first time they're seeing each other on the wedding day.
Got it.
Yeah, perfect. Wedding party photos, immediate photos, again, immediate family photos, sorry. One of the questions that I always ask is, are you doing immediate family and extended family photos or just immediate family? And I usually include grandparents and immediate family just because usually that they're kind of lumped in with that. If they're doing aunts, uncles, cousins, I like to have an idea of how many pictures there are because that's going to extend that amount of photo time. So again, just understanding that like immediate family photos aren't going to take very long. I have here on the timeline about 30 minutes. If it said extended family photos, it could have been 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how many photos they have. Usually prior to the ceremony, I allow 30 minutes for guests' arrival. And I always put a note that wedding parties should be out of the ceremony space. In particular, the bride typically, but usually I try to get them out and relaxed and in a place where they can be calm for 30 minutes prior to the start of the ceremony. Now, this is something that I started doing in recent years. I actually put the ceremony processional in my actual timeline. So I used to have a separate document. So I'd have the timeline itself, and then I'd have the ceremony information separately. But I actually found that I like having it built into the actual timeline because it is a part of the timeline. And I'm responsible for making sure that, you know, these songs start on time, that the right people are walking down the aisle at the right time. And so again, I want to make sure that I have that information in the body of my timeline, since that's what I'm referring to all day throughout the day. I'm going to kind of breeze through this a bit so we can move on to the next one.
Real quick question from Julia. What is a bridesmaid reveal?
Ooh, bridesmaids reveal. So we see this a lot nowadays. This is when typically you have like the mom and maybe a maid of honor helping the bride put get into her gown. And so then you'll have all the bridesmaids in the other room. They're already dressed and ready to go. And then the bride comes in, and then the girls, if you've seen the pictures, the girls are all like, oh, oh my gosh. And like, it makes for a really cute photo op.
Okay.
When the bridesmaids are also seeing the bride in her dress for the very first time.
I also got a request to put it up to 200% if possible. Well, 175, but I don't think it's
I can't do 175. I can do.
Yeah. Okay. This is good.
Okay.
Sorry, Yvonne, I got there late, but we're there now.
Hopefully. No, that's okay. And I'll do that on the next view too. Right. So then in this particular case, we were able to go right into cocktail reception. If they're doing bridal or sunset photos, which I think this was a November wedding, which is why sunset was like super early. That's something always to consider too. If someone does want to do sunset photos, or if the photographer wants to do sunset photos, you can literally Google what time sunset is in any part of the country, any part of the world, and it will tell you when sunset is, so you can make sure you build that into your timeline.
That's an anchor point right there.
Yes. And think about also not only sunset, but also be thinking about that in terms of your ceremony and your lighting and things like that. So doing a December wedding here in the Midwest means that if we want outdoor pictures, we have to do them before the ceremony. If the ceremony is at 4 or 5, because by the time we get out of the ceremony, all the light is out. So you always want to be thinking about those things. Obviously, it's not our job to understand lighting. That's the photographer's job. That's the videographer's job. However, it's our job as planners to help kind of manage that so that we're all on the same page, so that you don't have a client that's really disappointed that they didn't get enough pictures because no one told them that they needed to do their pictures earlier in the day. Cocktail reception. So this is one that I always like to point out to people too. I like cocktail reception to be 30 to 45 minutes. I know a lot of people call it a cocktail hour. And you can do a full hour, but personally, I think that people get tired of standing for a full hour. You get a little bit of food, a little bit of alcohol. After 30, 45 minutes, you're ready to sit down and actually eat.
Right.
So that's kind of a little tip from me to you. I like shorter cocktail.
We were talking before when you were planning the event, and you were mentioning that one of your clients was requesting a very long cocktail hour. I think it was a cocktail hour.
Yeah, it's 2 hours.
Right. And that's just too long.
Yeah, it's way too long. It's to me, it's disrespectful to guests because it's in this case, it's 250 people and there are no chairs in the cocktail reception space.
Right.
So that's 250 people that are going to be standing for 2 hours. And, I don't know about you guys, but I think about me standing in a pair of heels for 2 hours with nothing to do.
Right.
It doesn't seem very hospitable. It doesn't seem very concerning for the guests.
100%.
The wedding party is going to be out taking pictures, so they don't care. But in my experience, the guests will actually start to leave. They'll get frustrated and they'll leave and they'll get angry. So just, that's my 2 cents. 30 to 45 minutes is great.
Yeah.
Then we invite guests to their seats. Usually there's grand entrance of some kind. Could be a welcome or a blessing. You could do cake cutting here, first dance here. You might wait and do those things later. Dinner, obviously you want to know about how long it's going to take to serve dinner, whether it's a buffet or plated dinner, stations, what that looks like, your specialty dances, and then any of those late night things that happen. Bouquet toss, if you're doing that, late night snack. Are they doing a private last dance? Anything like that, a grand exit, things like that you'll want to put into your timeline.
Yeah. So when you're building these out, is it like it's a checklist that you're going through? Is this containing like all the possible things and then you cut it down, or
exactly? Okay. Yeah. So this kind of gives me all of those things on here so that I know to actually go in and ask all of those questions. Right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an actual timeline of mine. And I did change my phone number, so y'all can't call me randomly on. Not that you would, but I was like, maybe I should change the phone number so that I don't all of a sudden start getting texts from everybody. Yeah, anyway, let me go back. I didn't share that yet, did I? Let me do share. Here we go. Share. Okay. So here you can see my logo on here. You can see my couple's name.
Are you able to zoom to 200?
Oh, yep. I'm sorry. Thank you.
You're good.
There we go. You can see the guest count. You can see the parents' names. This obviously took place on Friday, November 11th. You could see the addresses, the times for everything that happened on Friday.
So you're putting your number there because this itinerary is being shared with everyone who's involved.
The client, yes. And eventually, as you'll see in this one, it's also being shared with vendors. So I want everyone to be able to have my contact information once we get into those phases. Yes.
Yeah.
So now what you see here is you see the actual wedding day itself. And you'll notice that everything is in black and in blue. You don't have to like these colors. You can pick whatever colors looks great for you. I work with a gal that she's like, I hate the blue that you use. Great. It's fine. I don't really care. It's totally up to you on how you do this. But this is how I help to keep things organized. Everything in black is what you saw on the previous schedule. Once I start adding things in blue, that's stuff that is vendor related only.
Okay.
So like here you see at 8:45, the Haven is the venue. It opens for vendor access. Bronzed and Blushed is the hair and makeup team. They arrived at the Haven for setup. Then the 9 o'clock piece, that was something that was already in the other timeline, but then I'm adding in other things in blue, like when the florist is going to arrive, when Luminate KC is a marquee letters, when are they arriving? And I put in there, like the 9 a.m. is the start time, but they also might be there sometime, anytime between 9 and 11, if that makes sense. And so you can see that I'm adding in every single vendor that is involved with the wedding. So florist, specialty people like photo booths, photographers, videographers, bakery, band, DJ if you have a DJ, all of those people. And generally speaking, I'm going to have a start time for every vendor and I'm going to have an end time for every vendor. So you want to make sure that you have all of that information in your timeline, especially when you're sending these out to the vendors themselves. It shows that we've got the first look. I love this part when you get down to 3:30 here, where you see the shuttle. Not only does it show you what vehicle, like what company, in this case, it was KCTG. It's a 25 passenger shuttle. And then I have the actual reservations listed out here so that we know specifically what we're waiting on, so that if the transportation shows up and they're like, we don't know for the right wedding, I absolutely know by looking at my timeline if the reservation number matches.
Got it.
So just great information to have. Even if you never refer to it, having it there that one time is going to be super important when you need it the most.
Yeah.
Here's a good example of a ceremony, like a full ceremony. So this has seating of the family. It has the song. It has whether it's instrumental or it's a recorded song, who's ushering who has to circle back and who just stays up at the front, at the altar, so to speak. Wedding party processional. Is there a song change? Is there not? Everyone is listed out. Do I have to have everyone's first and last name? Not necessarily, but I'm a big proponent of more information, the better. If I have 2 Katies or 2 Maddies or, whatever, I want to be able to know specifically who I'm talking to. I mean, here there's 2 Katies and Maddie was the bride and there's another Maddie that's a bridesmaid. That's why I put last names on there. They had a lot of kids, a lot of kids. And then the bridal entrance, recessional. And then I always talk about like what rows are being reserved for certain people, like parents, grandparents, things like that. There's not a lot of blue down below because once the reception begins, once the ceremony begins, there's less happening in terms of vendors, but I still like to put all that on there. Again, how they're being introduced, what their songs are, who's doing speeches, all of those kinds of things are in here just so I can make sure that I'm very, very clear on what's happening throughout the end of the night. And then you see at the very end, now you have all the vendors coming back or leaving at the end of the night. And then what time the venue is closed and we have to have a hard out at the end of the night. So that walks you through the whole thing.
Nice.
Okay. All right, last one, I promise, and then I'll open it up to questions because I know I feel like I'm going through this really, really fast.
No, I think this is super good. I love the details.
Okay, good. I know it's a lot. That's why I want to go through some of the questions and the one that was sent over to. But
we got some questions coming in. But you could also let us know in the chat, guys, if there's anything you want us to slow down on.
Okay, let me bump this one up here. Okay, so I didn't change my phone number. We're gonna skip past that. Same thing at the top. Now the reason this one has Wednesday on it is because we actually had rentals that were being delivered. This was a Friday wedding, so we had Wednesday's rental coming in. Thursday was our day for rehearsal, and then Friday was the actual wedding day. So just make sure you update all that information. But that's why there's an extra day on there, because we were specifically having a vendor come in even earlier than those 2 days. And now what you see is you see 3 colors. You see black, you see blue, and you see red. So the black, again, it's that same schedule we've been working on for the entire time that we're in the planning process. The blue is going to be adding in the vendors, and the red is going to be me and my team. So what time am I arriving? What time is my assistant arriving? And what are those tasks that we have to specifically do? So you see here in red, notes for rehearsal. These are things that I specifically wanted to make sure I covered at rehearsal. Going down a little bit onto Friday. And I'm sorry about the formatting. I couldn't get it quite perfect right before we jumped on here. But again, you're seeing that not only did I arrive at the hotel at 11:30, but that the first thing I wanted to do was check in with the girls, and then Britton and Allie, which was my photographer and my videographer. At 1 o'clock, my assistant, she arrived at the hotel. Her first job is to check in with me. And then as we go down, you start to see more of those notes added in. What is it that I need Jess to do once we go through once she arrives and she checks in with me? I need to make sure guys are getting their flowers pinned on. I need to make sure bouquets are getting loaded on the bus. So all those things that I want to remind myself and my assistant to do, that's what's going in red in the timeline here too. The rest of it's all pretty much exactly the same. This is obviously a different version, a different bride and groom, but that's how I stay organized, is by color coding, but still keeping everything in chronological order. I know who's involved in the black stuff, who's involved in the blue stuff, and who's involved in the red stuff.
Nice. Yeah, lots of details, a lot of information, way more than what the template is showing. But I think it's a good kind of view into how different you can make your own checklist.
Exactly. And then the very last thing I want to show on this one too is the last few pages. So you always want to have a kind of a PDI, personal decor items, or personal items that the bride and groom have, a checklist of all the things that you're going to be responsible for. And so like here, you'll see the wedding day items list. So these are all things that we have to make sure that we have on the wedding day. And this is going to change based on your individual client. But I always want to have a list of where they go, what there is. And then I have a list of every vendor, their contact name, their email address, their phone number for every single person that I'm working with in terms of vendors. I actually put that on my final master timeline.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. Again, because I just don't feel like there's too much information you can put on there. And what ends up happening for me is that I start out with a binder. Let me show you. Sorry, I'm getting up. So I have a binder for every single wedding. I know you can't see it because it's blurred out, but I have a binder for every wedding. And what happens when I get to the wedding is I basically take the schedule and the diagram out of it. And that's what I hold on to with me the entire day. And I never look at the binder again. And so by having every single thing I could possibly need on that timeline,
right,
I can run any wedding just having everything I need in one group of papers.
In one place.
And you guys are, for those of you who are more technological, like you can have it on your iPad or you can have it on your phone. I'm a little old school. I like to have paper. I like to be able to pull it out of my pocket and refer to it whenever I want to. I like to cross things off my list. But I know there's a lot of tools that you can do with technology now where you can actually do that. I'm just not quite there yet. Like I said, I'm a little older, a little more old school.
Yeah, but it just shows you like you don't need the iPad and the fancy tech to run a successful wedding.
You don't. You don't.
You're good to go.
It's great to use what tools you have at your disposal, but if you don't have those, you can still run a perfectly flawlessly executed wedding pretty easily. So yeah.
Okay, wow, that was a lot of information. We have a few, obviously, a ton of questions. We also want to review one of our students' own timeline. Before we jump into that, I just want to share with you guys a link real quick. So yeah, if you guys have a second to leave a review, it's been really helpful for students that are calling in and they're not sure if they want to, start a new career path, and being able to see students that went through the school or had the experience of changing careers or starting in the event industry, being able to read your guys' stories has been really helpful. I know a lot of you guys have already done this, but if you have a second right now or after the event, just to leave like a quick experience, it's just really helpful for students. So I'll leave that up and running for now. And I guess we'll actually, Lisa, if you want to share the presentation.
Yep, I'm going to do that. And while I'm doing that, somebody asked the question, I just saw it in the chat, about headphones and walkie-talkies. In the age of cell phones, I don't think you need any of that. I have a smartwatch, I text, and that is it's, in my opinion, enough.
And they have walkie-talkies on these watches now.
Yeah, that's right. And I feel like you can always have that, again, that technology, but like, do I feel like you have to have it? No.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. So this timeline is one that someone submitted today in the virtual community, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
First of all, it's beautiful, and I love that it's beautiful. It's very succinct. Everything looks very easy to read, which I really love. I think you could put a little bit more information into it, kind of like what I've done, if it doesn't seem too overwhelming for you. The things that I see on here, I think the beginning part of the day actually looks really, really good. Some of the things that I noticed, and again, because it doesn't look like there's a first look happening, that's probably why your cocktail reception is a little bit long. It's a little bit over, I think it's an hour and 15 minutes, I believe is what I saw on there. Again, I think it's also dependent on how long you have your photographer for, and then also not just how long you have the photographer for, but like how much bang do you want to get for your buck? So again, if you're paying a lot of money for a photographer, but they're really only taking a lot of, group pictures or those kind of pictures, bridal portraits for like 30 minutes or 15 minutes. I think bridal portraits on here were 15 minutes. As a customer, I would be like, what, I just spent like thousands and thousands of dollars and I had 15 minutes worth of pictures.
Right.
So you want to make sure that you're balancing the amount of time given for like what the investment is, but you also then have to go back to like, well, if we only have an hour and 15 minutes because the client is adamant that they don't want to do a first look, then you're going to have to squeeze that into that hour and 15 minutes. And you just have to do the best you can and work alongside that photographer to make sure that, that happens the way that it's structured. But that's one of those things where if I could push that a little bit, if I could explain to my client or educate my client into why it might be better to do things differently, I would definitely attempt to do that.
Yeah.
Just like I attempted to talk this client into not having a 2-hour cocktail reception.
Right.
They won't budge on it. So I'm going along with it because I don't really have a choice, but I also have been very clear that I'm not comfortable with it. So that's also, you're trying to protect your reputation too. Because if you're a guest at a wedding and you're like, oh my God, it sucked, the cocktail reception was 2 hours long, I don't know what their planner was thinking.
Right.
That's a horrible way to feel. But I also have to rest in the fact that I know that I never would have suggested that under any circumstances.
Right. So you communicated with them, you let them know how you feel, and then the rest is on them. At the end of the day, it's their day that they're choosing. And
100%. Right. So here, I love that you've got like the first dance before dinner, and then you're doing cake cutting and speeches, going into those specialty dances, dance floor open. I actually really liked everything about this timeline except for that chunk right there in the middle. And again, that could be because of the time constraints that you had. So if that's the case, then you did a fantastic job. If there's some wiggle room, that's where I would put it right there. That seems really tight for the amount of pictures that you want to get into that timeline.
Yeah, yep. I know one of the things that stands out for this one is a lot less like detailed information. Do you think in this case, like, does it still work? Is it still functional to have less information? Like have it just pretty straightforward like this, or? you recommend adding a bit more just for?
So again, I think it has to do more with the individual planner and how it works best for him or her and then their team.
Yeah.
So for me, what I like about color coding is that I can clearly see if I'm looking for something like, hey, what time was the cake supposed to be delivered? When I look at this, there is no cake being delivered on here.
Right.
Now, this is just a wedding timeline. So we didn't necessarily say like, make sure your vendor information is in there. But you've got some things in there. And then like, I think photographer arriving in there. Was it in there? Yeah. For photographer and catering arrives. So you've got that in there, but then we don't know what time the cake is arriving. We don't know what time transportation is necessary. We have some transportation in here, but actually maybe there was cake. Oh, dropped off with desserts. So lunch was dropped off with the desserts. I don't know if that's desserts for the lunch or if that's desserts for the reception. So that's where if you got sick as a planner and someone had to take over your itinerary,
okay, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, could they run the wedding day without you having to say a word? And I would say that this is a great start, but by adding in those extra details, I think you did a really good job of making it into one page. It doesn't need to be on one page. It can be on 12 pages. It doesn't really matter as long as everything is clear and concise, so that like anybody that's walking in could understand what's happening on the wedding day.
Awesome. Okay. I hope that was helpful. Yeah, I think that was pretty cool. Let us know in the chat if this has been helpful for you guys. It's good for us to know if we're hitting the mark. I saw Sheila let us know. Great, thorough information. Presenter was spot on with her information. I will use some of the ideas. So always nice to get that kind of feedback. Okay. I think we could hop into the Q&A really quick.
Okay.
We got lots of questions to go through. So first one from Heidi. Hope I'm pronouncing that right. Is it smart to include the DJ timeline into this one timeline?
Yeah. So what I do is I merge theirs into my document. So, for this 2-hour one, that's just the one that's next. So we have a DJ and he sent me his script yesterday. And I'm taking all of his information and just making sure that it matches with all the information that I have. So all of those song names, things like that. Sometimes there's things I don't put in there, like sometimes the DJ or band will talk about like when their set times are or when they're taking a break. I don't necessarily feel like I need to put that into my timeline, but it's great information to have. So that's the kind of thing I'll actually print their version out and put it in my binder. But mostly I'm just making sure that my timeline matches up with theirs. I've caught a lot of discrepancies that way. I've had bands that are like, I thought we were going until midnight. And I'm like, well, the venue is kicking us out at midnight. So we have to end at 11 or whatnot. So it's a great place to compare, but I don't necessarily put their exact information in. I put it in to make it look pretty and look nice in my timeline.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. Next question from Cherie. What are the key details and contingencies you account for when building a wedding day timeline, and how do you ensure flexibility while keeping the event on schedule? Den's question. Let's get to it.
Yeah. So I like to say that there are two things that should start on time: the ceremony and dinner. And we already talked about the ceremony, but dinner, because if you run late on dinner, you're compromising the integrity of the food, and then therefore running the risk of having cold food that's not textured the way it's supposed to because of, temperature and all those kind of things. So those are the two things. Everything else runs on ish time, meaning it's going to be starting at 4-ish. Yeah. And so because there has to be wiggle room in there. If you don't account for ish time, you're setting yourself up for failure. And so what I mean by that is, like, if I'm with a client on the day and I know that hair and makeup is supposed to end at 12:30, and then I have bridesmaids getting dressed at 1:00. It doesn't actually take 30 minutes to end hair and makeup and then wait 30 minutes to get the bridesmaid starting to get dressed and then another 30 minutes to get the bride in her dress. It doesn't actually take 30 minutes to get dressed.
Right.
But I allow for 30 minutes because if hair and makeup doesn't really end until 12:45, and then the bridesmaids all want to pee really fast, or they have to run to their room because they forgot their toothbrush, and then they don't start getting dressed until 1 or 1:05 or 1:10, I'm still on schedule for the entire day.
Yeah.
So that's why we put ish time in there. Same thing with the reception. I want to start dinner on time, but if toasts are supposed to start at 7 and the bride and groom are trying to get around to a few more tables, it's okay if we start at 7:10 or 7:15. We're now on ish time.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we want to keep dinner at the right time and ceremony at the right time.
Hope that answers your question. We'll move on to Heidi. So from the first meeting with couple, how apart do you schedule the other meetings to revise the timeline?
So timeline for me is very fluid. So I will usually do at the beginning of my planning time with them is do a timeline meeting where we're specifically talking about building the timeline. But all of those factors that I don't know the answers to are ones I put in red, like I mentioned.
Yeah.
And then as we move through the planning process, I'll fill those in as we get that information. I have a very detailed wedding planning checklist that brings up all of those points so that I can go back and say, now that we have the rehearsal scheduled, now I can go in and fill that in my timeline. So anytime I make an update to our planning process, then I go in and I update that in the timeline as well.
Okay, next question from Abigail. Broadcast. If you have to change the timeline on the day of the wedding due to a problem or a delay, do you consult with the client before making any changes?
That's a tough question. It depends on what the situation is. So I have had to change. It depends on how much it affects everything. So, like I had a ceremony start really late one time. Like 15 minutes late. And I knew why the reason was, and it was because it was really silly. It was because the pastor laid down for a nap and didn't wake up in time for the ceremony. Luckily, she lived like literally 2 minutes from the church, but I was not about to go up to the bride and groom. They were all lined up and ready to walk down the aisle. And like, they were like, what's going on? And I was like, we're getting started in just a moment. Everything is great. You know, like you have to kind of wing it, but yeah. I was not going to tell them that. Now, after the wedding, I took them out to brunch like a couple weeks later and they're like, what happened? And I told them, and they thought it was hilarious.
Yeah.
They would not have found it hilarious on the wedding day.
No.
So you have to understand when it's okay to ask the client, when it's okay to talk to just vendors, and when it's okay to like make game time decisions without consulting anyone. Right. And that's experience. That's, figuring out, also knowing your individual clients. There are some clients that like, if you tell them that there's the slightest anything, they'll like blow up and like lose their minds. And then there's other clients who are like, oh, it's fine. I don't really care. So you have to kind of learn who your clients are too. So you know when you should talk to them, when you shouldn't. I try not to let my clients know about any mistakes until after the wedding.
Yeah.
That's always my plan.
I don't know. I guess I've never planned a wedding, but I know as an event planner, I've organized some events. And one thing that always whoever trained me at the time just took me to the side while I was kind of stressing about the event. And they said, you're the only one that knows exactly how this is going to look, how it's supposed to be. So if something is going wrong, people don't really know other than you. And that always kept me at ease.
Yeah. Well, and it's also about how you present yourself too. So if I walk in with a worried look on my face, people are going to instantly know that something's wrong. If I walk in with a smile on my face, no one knows. No one cares.
On your timeline, on your timeline sheet, did you have the pastor's address or phone number? Like how did you were the one contacting them or?
Yeah. So the church, so I did have her phone number. She wasn't answering the phone. The church coordinator actually called the pastor's husband, and he was in the other, like he like went in and woke her up, and then she.
That's terrible. Okay, let's move on to the next one. From Heidi, does the Does the first look usually happen at ceremony entry?
So when I call it a first look, it usually means it's happening at a location other than where the ceremony is taking place. Usually it's in a hotel room or the getting ready space. Sometimes it's at the ceremony location if it needs to happen there, if it's a beautiful location or something like that. So that's what I refer to when I say a first look. If there's no first look listed, it means that the first time they're seeing each other is when he's already at the end of the aisle and she walks down the aisle, and that's when they see each other. So that's it's kind of confusing terminology. But when we in the industry, when we refer to a first look, it's usually outside of the ceremony itself.
Oh, okay, that was confusing because I thought it was okay. That does make sense though. Now that
So some people like to have again, you find that people are paying so much money for photography. So they want to go out and take their pictures before the ceremony so that you can go from ceremony right into reception. Yeah. And in order to do that, what people are doing is they're doing what's called a first look. And so they're actually seeing each other, still having those photography moments and those videography moments, but they're seeing each other so that they can kind of move on with the day, get pictures taken, spend some time doing that, having a good time with each other. And then we go into the formalities of the ceremony and the reception.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question from Ebony. Which do you prefer, bride's hair or makeup done first?
It's totally up to the bride and the makeup and hair team. It does not matter to me one way or the other. Many times I will have brides that get their hair set, then they'll have their makeup done, and then their hair will be finished. Some people want to wait until the very, very end. Some brides want to go first. That has absolutely no bearing on my day whatsoever. I'm just allowing the time frame for the beginning of hair and makeup to the end of hair and makeup.
Yeah, makes sense.
Good question though.
Question from Tiana. It's not necessarily about a timeline, but for day of, how till what time do you stay at the wedding? Are you there until the last person leaves, or?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So a lot of people do this differently. So first and foremost, most of the weddings that I do are full service, and in a full service capacity, I do stay until the very end. Yeah. There are rare cases where I don't, but those are like individual type cases where there's some sort of reason that I'm not staying. So there's lots of different ways that people do it. Sometimes people do it on package based. And so like a package, if you have a day of package, or, wedding day directing or whatever that smallest package is, it might be like 8 hours on the wedding day. We used to do that for the company that I used to work for. And when we would do that, we would talk to the client about what those 8 hours were. So if it was the kind of situation where they really needed me there on the back half, like there until the very end, then I would taper my hours towards that. And then I might suggest adding on hours if needed. If it's like at a hotel where they're literally going down to their rooms at the end of the night or up to their rooms at the end of the night, I don't always know that I need to stay for that. And so I would maybe stack my 8 hours more towards the beginning of the day. Right. But in the company that I work for now, and then my own company, we don't really have a set amount of hours. We just kind of go halfway between when hair and makeup begins and ends. So if hair and makeup is from 8 to noon, we might come around 10:30ish, that kind of thing, and then stay till the very end.
Got it. Okay. Next question from Abigail. Is it helpful to have a business phone number, or is it easier to use personal phone number?
So I use my personal phone number for everything internally. As a business owner, I also have a business phone. It goes to my cell phone. But I have a business phone, but a lot of that is just to weed out all of the junk calls, like the Google business listings and all the junk, is mainly why I have a business number, so that I don't get that on my personal cell phone.
Got it. Question from Annette. Can you speak to how you handle working with vendors? For example, the venue has an event planner, setup, caterers, etc. Are you ensuring that everyone, including vendors, are staying to the agreed timeline?
Yeah, so that's a lot of what we do is timeline management. Now, when you start working with vendors that you're very comfortable with and that like you're the one that's referring them and that kind of thing, you actually know the quality of what your vendors do. And so it's less about that because you have more freedom to not have to sort of quote unquote babysit them. When I watch more carefully is when it's a vendor that I am not familiar with. A photographer I've never worked with before, a caterer I've never worked with before, those kind of things. That's when I feel like I have to manage that a little bit more closely. But again, for me, it's a lot of experience and longevity. I've been doing this for such a long time that most of the vendors that I work with are people I'm comfortable with. And so I don't have to do as much management of vendors as maybe I did, 10, 15 years ago. But you definitely, as you're getting to know your industry and your location and stuff, you're going to have to manage that for sure. Yeah. And when I say manage it, I mean manage it as a team player. So that does not mean that you should be micromanaging the photographer. But it does mean like, hey, we're running like 5 minutes late. Do you think you're going to have the wedding party back in time for grand entrance at 5:30? Right. And if the photographer says, give me 5 extra minutes, can we do it at 5:35? Of course. Again, that's where that ish time comes in and that kind of stuff. But it's still having that conversation in a conversational, we're all on the same team sort of way, instead of, hey, I'm starting this at 5:30, so you better have the wedding party back here. In my opinion, that's not the way to handle it. I know there's a lot of planners out there that are like that, but it's not about it. It's about managing it. It's not about ruling it. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I like that style. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's going to save you from fighting with people. I think you don't want to get into like arguing about something. You want to work together and
you want to build good vendor relationships. You want people to refer you just like you refer them. And so if you're all working together to make the best experience possible for your couple, then that's what everybody wants.
Yeah. Question from Yvonne. Is there a standard checklist?
Like a checklist for the timeline or a checklist for wedding planning?
Do you want to elaborate on that, Yvonne? I think they mean just like a standard checklist for what we're talking about. I did share our checklist. You guys should be able to download it. If you're already in the wedding planning course, you should already have access to it. But if you are not, you'll have access now. So yeah, I'll wait on your response, Yvonne, if you want to elaborate. Question from Annette. Let me share this. What do you include in your binder? I relate a lot to your style.
So I put basically any important piece of information in there. So I put contracts in there, invoices in there. I still take handwritten notes, and then I type up my notes and I send them to my client. So both my handwritten and my type notes are in there. Diagrams, I'm trying to think. I have it I have tabs in there that like timeline diagram notes, investment, if you're doing a budget for your clients, ceremony information, and then I divide it all out by vendor. So florist, band, whatnot, and keep everything individually labeled so that I know where to find it if I need it for some reason.
Very organized. I love it. Okay, I think we have time for one last question. We're already a bit over time, but last one from Nikia. Have you heard of Timeline Genius? If so, how do you feel about it?
So I've heard of Timeline Genius. I've never actually used it. However, I know a lot of planners that do swear by it. I think for me, just because I had been working on timelines for such a long period of time before Timeline Genius really became bigger, I never felt that I had to use it. I don't know if it's like subscription based or if you pay a one-time fee. I don't know what their like how you pay or don't. I have no idea. And so all I can speak to is the fact that I've heard great things about it. But I personally have never felt that it's necessary to invest in something like that because I already feel like I build really successful timelines. And so, if you I almost think it would be a better investment to start learning how to build your timelines and then asking a professional wedding planner, like myself or someone in your area and say like, hey, would you mind taking a look at this? I'd be happy to pay you to do that. So you pay me, not me, but I'm just as an example, like you pay a planner $50 and they look over your timeline. And after a few times, you don't have to have anyone look over it anymore. And all you invested was $50 to have someone like kind of walk through some timelines with you. To me, that's a better use because you're getting real life, live, education from someone. Now, Timeline Genius might offer a live chat. I have no idea. But in my opinion, I would rather find someone that could mentor me a little bit rather than having to pay for something that I know that like I created after years of experience.
Right.
I don't know if that helps or not.
We are going to wrap it up. I just want, we mentioned Yvonne, they responded. So they clarified wedding timeline. So that I guess the wedding day timeline. And the question was, is there a general, what was the question?
Checklist. Yeah.
Is there a
No, so
standard checklist?
I don't have a general checklist because again, I use the template that I have, and that in and of itself is kind of my checklist. Right. Yeah. So I know QC has some other types of checklists in there that you can use. Like, are you asking this? Are you asking this? I actually do it just based on looking at my timeline because it has all the prompts kind of built into it. And so that's how I do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
I'm going to just share the quick link to the virtual community. I really recommend that you guys join it if you haven't already. We share a lot of resources in there. There's a great community. We obviously talk about the events that are coming up, so you could stay kind of in tune with the conversation that we're having about it. So yeah, join it. You guys were great, awesome questions and great feedback from you guys. Everyone seems to have really enjoyed it. Yeah, I'm seeing this was so amazing and useful. Thank you, Heidi. Lisa, thanks for a lot. Thanks a lot for sharing so much of your experience. Thank you. Yeah, so it looks like you guys enjoyed it. Let us know if you want more specific topics covered in the virtual community. We can listen to what you guys want and make it happen. So thank you everyone for joining. Lisa, you did an amazing job as always. I think we're getting pretty good at this. So yeah, we will be back next month with another webinar. Awesome. Have a wonderful rest of your day, guys. And thanks again.
Thank you, guys.
Take care.
See ya.